Mukesh Kapila, who is a former Director for Emergency Response and currently an Emeritus Professor of Global Health and Humanitarian Aid at the University of Manchester. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. First of all, your reaction to the events of the last half an hour or so.
You know, in a lifetime of being in war zones and seeing all sorts of terrible stuff, I'm completely left speechless by watching the images which you're showing on your channel. All I can say is that this is worse than some of the worst atrocities I've seen elsewhere, and I'm just utterly appalled. So what we're seeing here is an atrocity. It is more than a war crime. It's a crime against humanity. And I think it is not just a legal issue here. It is the most despicable thing that we have seen in the last 10 days. And, you know, whatever sympathy Israel garnered for the atrocities done against it, it has just been cancelled out by this bombing on a hospital. And Israel can say, for example, it was a mistake. Perhaps it will say that. But that is no consolation. And certainly, I think, unless this becomes a great game changer, it's a tragedy which is wasted. I cannot think of any way that this atrocity can be justified.
And in your former role as Director for Emergency Response, I mean, how would an organisation even begin to try to tackle the scale of the humanitarian crisis that we're seeing unfolding?
Well, if it was somewhere else where people could be got out to somewhere safe, if people could have access to the basics of survival like electricity and water, then there would be a fair chance that those who weren't killed in direct violence, meaning bombings or bullets and bombs, then they would have a chance of survival. The situation now in Gaza and in a hospital like this, it's just like you might as well kind of shoot directly at people because that's what it is, like fish in a bowl. And I don't think you can do much about in the humanitarian sense here, because in any case, the hospitals and the humanitarian workers, they themselves are at the front line. Many of them many UN workers have lost their lives and others as well. And supplies are limited. The hospitals don't have enough medicines or essentials like oxygen and so on. So I think we are grasping at palliatives talking about humanitarian relief here, though I'm sure the people on the ground will be doing it, and they'll be doing it in the best way possible to whoever they can get to. And those little acts of humanity are the ones that are probably keeping people going. But I think this mass industrial slaughter. That's what this is. This is industrial slaughter. This is not a war. This is not a fair war at any rate. No wars are fair. And of course, when you have a war in an urban area, it's very difficult to target properly. But this is an industrial slaughter. So how can anyone justify it? Whatever grievances Israel may have against the Hamas, they have completely scored their own goal with this. And this is completely unforgivable. And I think this should change attitudes around the world. I think Israel's lost it.
And yet, publicly, we see Antony Blinken, the US Secretary of State. We see Joe Biden, the US President, Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister here in the UK, publicly reiterating their messages of support for Israel. Do you suspect that privately now different conversations will be taking place?
I think so. I think maybe the rhetoric will change after this latest atrocity here, which we've seen in the last hour or so. That's one thing. The second thing is that politically, back in their own countries, I think the tide might also be turning. It's one thing to support Israel's self-defense. It's another thing to provide unlimited weaponry. Remember, this hospital was hit by some kind of missile or rocket, and it was supplied from the United States, most probably. Is this what the American people want to do? Is this what the British people want to do? it's easy to sit in Whitehall or in the White House and offer all these things. And bless Anthony Blinken, by the way, he's been working amazingly in the last few days, running from capital to capital, trying to bring peace. And no one can fault him for that. But when with one hand you're doing diplomacy, and on the other hand you are not just providing diplomatic encouragement, but actually supplying the weapons of making war on hospitals, then quite honestly, the US or the UK or the European Union's influence in this is deeply compromised. So don't be surprised if other powers like Russia and China, who have their own agendas in all this, and then by no means honest brokers either, get into the act as well. And then, of course, I see no alternative but to this. In the First World War, when they bombed in Sarajevo, we started the First World War. As I look at the images going on the screen in front of me, I'm fearing that this will be the moment where historians will define is that we started another great war. Let's hope it's not a world war, but it's definitely going to get out of the Israel-Gaza zone into much bigger. And that's, I think, is what we fear. And this is where people like Biden and Sunak and others, they really need to think seriously. This is not a moment for posturing in favor of an ally. If an ally behaves like this, then you're as guilty as the ally that you're arming and encouraging. So this is completely to be condemned in all possible ways, and the Western world has got to retitrate its policies in this regard.
Yeah, and it raises huge questions, doesn't it, about the strategy that Israel are taking, if indeed there is one, because just 2 days ago, residents in northern Gaza were told to move south. Leaflets were dropped from the air telling them to move south if they wanted to stay alive, essentially, move south for their own safety. Hundreds of thousands of people did that. Some 600,000 people left and went towards the Rafah border crossing, near that crossing with Egypt. They moved south and out of Gaza City. They moved to hospitals and UN schools and temporary shelters where they hoped that they would be safe. And then those buildings appear to have been struck by airstrikes from Israel, therefore begging the question, how much scope have they been given, perhaps by the United States or indeed other partners? And is there a line? And if so, where is that line?
I think once Israel encourages people to come south, and they did, and then the bombing not only continued, but also targeted the south, I think that just shows that this war, this duplicitous conflict, Israel has lost it, as I was saying earlier on. There is no hope in hell. You can create a hell down here, but there is absolutely no hope in hell that Israel is going to win this one, because it might be able to turn Gaza into rubble, but from that rubble and the ashes will rise a war that will take down Israel if Israel goes down this particular track. And this, I can't understand how people supposedly intelligent, supposedly clever, supposedly with all these technologies and all the capacities that Israel forces have and the Israelis have, could follow such atrocious strategies as they've been doing in recent days. And this, I think, what we're seeing today is the climax, if you like, of a bankrupt strategy. So Netanyahu and his cronies, who are barely holding on to power within Israel, they really have lost it. My only hope is, I'm only thinking there must be many decent Israelis who are equally appalled by what their own government is doing in relation to what's happening. And where are those decent Israelis within Israel? Where are the decent Israelis elsewhere to try and see if we can have a different approach in this particular area? This is not to justify Palestinian atrocities, or rather Hamas atrocities, but I think now, if you're going to measure atrocity against atrocity, then I think Israel takes the championship.
Mukesh, we really thank you for coming on the programme. I appreciate your analysis on these difficult times and this difficult story. Mukesh Kapila there, former Director for Emergency Response and currently working at the University of Manchester. Thank you very much indeed.